To inform the minds of the people and to follow their will is the chief duty of those placed at their head. Hello, I'm Alan Scholl, Director of the Freedom Project, sponsored by American Opinion Foundation. In this episode of our Principles of the Constitution series, we're going to focus on the executive branch of our government, also known as the presidency. In our last session, we learned that the founders intended to give the legislative branch the most power. In fact, the legislative branch had more power than the executive and judicial branches combined. Here's a question for you. True or false? The president has the power to create or change existing laws. The answer is false. The original intent of the founders was for the executive branch to be the enforcer of laws created by the legislature and compared to the Constitution by the Supreme Court. Article 2 of the Constitution lists the duties of the executive branch. It starts by describing the terms, qualifications, and method of selection for an American president. A presidential term is 4 years, and every president is limited to 2 terms. Franklin Roosevelt was the only president elected to more than 2 terms. He was elected 4 times, but died shortly into his final term. In 1951, the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, limiting a president to 2 terms. In order to run for president or vice president, the candidate must be a natural-born U.S. citizen, at least 35 years old, and a resident of the United States for at least 14 years. Candidates are then voted on and elected by the citizens and Electoral College. The Electoral College ensures the less populated states have an equal voice in presidential elections. Article 2 of the Constitution describes the removal, replacement, selection, and duties of the vice president. If the president is impeached, the vice president assumes the presidency and the Speaker of the House becomes vice president. Only 2 presidents have ever been tried for impeachment. Our 17th president, Andrew Johnson, and 42nd president, Bill Clinton, but neither were removed. Sections 2 and 3 of Article 2 define the duties and responsibilities of the executive branch, which include Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, if we are at war, as declared by Congress. To continue that point, our first president, George Washington, said, "The Constitution vests the power of declaring war in Congress. Therefore, no offensive expedition of importance can be undertaken until after they shall have deliberated upon the subject and authorized such a measure." In other words, the president is not commander-in-chief until Congress declares war. I'd like to bring in our friend Dr. Smith, who's considered an expert in constitutional law and American politics. Dr. Smith, can you tell us what the original role of commander-in-chief entailed?
The role of commander-in-chief, as envisioned by the founders, was to give the president the power to act quickly when necessary during times of national crisis. Primarily, they have in mind here civil war, insurrection, or an invasion, where the commander-in-chief has the power to step up, mobilize resources, and defend America against an onslaught. It's limited, of course, by the power of Congress to declare war, and so those 2 powers balance together. In other words, the commander-in-chief power really gives the president the ability to use his resources as necessary to defend us. However, he can't commit all of government's resources to that fight without a declaration of war or without the support of Congress.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Other duties of the president include granting pardons to convicted criminals, reporting to Congress on the condition of the country, and the main duty, to see that laws are faithfully executed. Over time, the president's powers have expanded beyond what the Constitution stated. Since 1945, the president has assumed the power to declare war and manage war without the approval of Congress. The founders intended the president to be a public servant with the duties of enforcing just and constitutional laws. They never intended the executive branch to rule over individuals or states. In 1798, our third president and author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, warned us, "It is jealousy and not confidence which prescribes limited constitutions to bind down those whom we are obliged to trust with power. Our Constitution has accordingly fixed the limits to which, and no further, our confidence may go." Let's bring back Dr. Smith. Doctor, can you explain to us when executive orders are constitutional?
It's a good question. It's a difficult question, actually. Executive orders, I think, are constitutional so long as they don't have the weight of law in the sense that they usurp either congressional power or that they contradict parts of the Constitution. And in some ways, an executive order does function like a little piece of legislation, but it can't do the same things that legislation can. Executive orders might be able to dictate how particular funds are spent that the executive branch has already been given power to spend. But there are limits on those executive orders. If they're clearly unconstitutional, then the Supreme Court can step in and rule them as unconstitutional, and they will be null and void as a result. If Congress wants to circumvent an executive order, all they have to do is pass a law, and that executive order becomes null and void.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Do you remember all that? Let's find out. Question 1. The executive branch is led by A. Congress, B. Supreme Court, C. Speaker of the House, or D. President. The correct answer is D, the President. Question 2. The Founders' original intent for the executive branch was to A. Enforce laws, B. Create laws, C. Control the people, or D. Rule from the White House. The answer is A. Enforce the laws written by the legislature. Question 3. Who is the only president to serve more than 2 terms in office? A. George Washington, B. Theodore Roosevelt, C. Franklin Roosevelt, or D. Thomas Jefferson. The answer is C. Franklin Roosevelt, who died shortly into his 4th term. Question 4. Which is not a qualification to run for president? A. Must be an American citizen, B. U.S. resident for 14 years, C. At least 35 years old, D. One parent must be an American citizen. The answer is D. A candidate's parents have no bearing on their qualifications to run for president. Question 5. How many presidents have been tried for impeachment? A. None, B. 1, C. 2, or D. 3. The answer is C. Only 2 presidents have been tried for impeachment, President Andrew Johnson and President Bill Clinton. How did you do? Hopefully you learned a little bit more about your United States Constitution and the role of the executive branch. I'm Alan Scholl for the Freedom Project. Welcome home.